Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Stedman podcast. I hope you all are having a wonderful day. Joining me today on this topic, which we're going to be talking about the Church of God, which, I feel like anytime we try to talk about something else, Micah, we always have to keep coming back to the Church of God because there's always something new going on, something good, bad, or ugly. We were coming back and my wife said, "Hey, why do you keep obsessing with the Church of God?" I'm like, "Well, it's part of, it's been a big part of my life, so that's why." And I'm still a pastor in the Church of God. So sometimes when things are happening, especially things where I get very confused about, I almost have to talk about it to see if I'm crazy or if other people are seeing the same things I'm seeing. So thanks for joining me on this topic.
Yeah, it's always fun to be with you and talk some shop. And it, you know, to Laura's question, it's like, and it almost feels like we're journalists in a way because they just keep giving us stuff to talk about. They keep giving us controversial things. They keep giving us confusing things. They keep giving us. It's almost like a news of the week. Like, what are they going to give us this week? And
Yeah, we don't even have to do stories gone wild because half the time.
the Church of God is a story's gone wild.
Wow. Oh my
I mean,
goodness. So
am I wrong?
well, I just I don't know. Like I feel like I think I might have mentioned, I don't know if I mentioned this on an episode or if I mentioned this to you before we recorded last week, but I was saying how like I just find it surprising that Anderson University, which is a Church of God Bible school,
Right.
like was able, President Pistol's retiring.
Sure.
And then probably less than a year, they already announced his successor, and they're moving forward with things, and they're going on with their day. And yet, Jim Lyons has announced his retirement 2 years ago, and we still have no update as far as not only a general director, but even an interim director at this point. It's been 2 years. And I'm just so confused, like why? And I mean, I understand probably why, just because how the university is structured as far as its organization and its leadership structure and how they hire and fire and recruit and do all that stuff for president and whatnot, and then versus how the Church of God does it. But still, you almost kind of have to. I don't know. Sometimes you almost have to kind of figure out, like, okay, like what's the matter? Like, why are we? Why is this taking so long? And I don't think it's because, well, we want to make sure we get the right person or we want to make sure we have. I don't even know if that's it either, because you could still find the right person and not take almost 2 years to find somebody or to figure out what you need, especially if you're in ongoing conversations with your team to be able to do this. But I don't know. But again, that's not our topic today. Our topic is something a little bit more interesting. We have had two organizations that are kind of affiliated with the Church of God in some way. One's a state ministry. The other one is, I don't know if you would call it a state ministry. I would say it's just like a group, kind of like the women or the Christian Women's Connection. They're just kind of like a group that is associated with the Church of God. They have connections. The people who run it are ordained Church of God leaders. But they have some stuff going on too, and it just kind of offers some confusion. So I don't know, where do you want to start, Micah?
Um, you're referring to the Pastor's Fellowship thing, right?
Yes, I'm referring to Pastor's Fellowship. Yes.
Well, first of all, the post that I told you about, um, was it like 4 days ago as the day of this recording? Something over the weekend, and like we were sharing something back and forth, and it was something about advertising the upcoming Pastors Fellowship event, which happens every May. It's a 2 day thing where they have like, I don't know, 9 services or something in 2.5 days where they just have nonstop services. And it's for those of you that don't know, Scott and I are Church of God guys, but Pastor's Fellowship is a very traditional good old boys and gals. Like it seems like a very, very 50 years old concept that they come together and they do church service and they sing the Church of God hymns and they have the piano and they have the worship leader up there, waving their arms, and then they have a really, really, you know, powerful message, and they have themes on each message. And so I've went a couple of times. I led worship years ago um, at that event, and it's just different, right? Like it's traditional.
Yeah.
And it reminds me a lot of like what Anderson camp meeting used to be back in the day, on a
Okay.
much smaller scale. Um, and now we call that the National Convention of the Church of God, and it's a completely different name, NAC, whatever. And so the other day, Scott and I were, kind of chatting it up on Messenger or texting or whatever. And I noticed that they posted an advertisement for the upcoming Pastor's Fellowship, and they gave a list of the speakers and their themes, or the theme for the overall, uh, if you want to call it a conference gathering. Let's just use the word gathering.
Yeah.
The the overall gathering, they used wording in their post, and it kind of like it was disturbing to me. And I didn't think there was anything particularly wrong, like ethically with it, but it was just like, join us for a time of uncompromising teaching. And as somebody who's done social media for churches and other arenas, like I don't know that I would use a word like uncompromising in a post. And it was really concerning, honestly, because, especially in this time of division, not only of the nation and as a world, we're facing division within our church culture, the Church of God culture, the church abroad, beyond the Church of God. And what I mean by that is just in different churches and different spaces, denominations,
Hmm.
whatever. We're facing so much criticism. We're facing so much division. And you're posting something about how what you're going to do is uncompromising. And it's basically saying, we're not wrong. Our way is the way. This is the only way kind of thing. And it's very territorial. And it just came off to me and it rubbed me the wrong way.
Mm.
Um, and I don't know. How do you feel about something like that?
I think I would agree with kind of the terminology. Like I feel like when it comes to the idea of teaching, right? A lot of times, a lot of times when you're teaching something, you would assume most of the time, and I assume every person who's going to be speaking at Pastor's Fellowship is going to put in the effort, the time, the research, and everything to do to present the gospel in a way that is, I would say, as accurately, biblically accurate, right? They're not going to proof text. They're not going to do. I would assume that, and just kind of looking at some of our speakers, some of these speakers I've known, I've heard speak before. They're pretty, pretty kosher when it comes to that. Like, there's not one person I'm like, that person likes to take liberties with the word of God. You know what I mean?
Oh, well, I want to stop you there for a second, Scott,
Yeah,
because like, when you say preach the gospel, right? Like,
yeah,
I don't think there's anything wrong with that, and I'm not questioning what you're saying. But I guess one of the issues that I have with the concept of pastor fellowship is it's not like an evangelistic thing. It's not like they're going out and holding a revival. It's literally they're preaching for preachers. It's
yeah.
called pastors fellowship. Pastors, from all over that area come together, and it's almost like I would almost call it like a Church of God pastors retreat, where you have like all these
Yeah.
folks, come together. But like to me, it's very like they're not one person in those services are going to be people that aren't churched, right? And so
Yeah.
when you say gospel, the gospel, you know, I don't think they're going to preach salvation in the sense of
Oh
like, oh,
no.
Scott, you're lost, you're dying, you're going to hell, brother. I need you to come to the altar and pray
I
with
hope
me. And
not. I really hope
no,
not if it's a bunch of pastors.
No, I mean, just like I need you to come and
Yeah,
pray and receive the word of the Lord and receive Jesus and what he's done for you. And you're not going to have that, right? Like, at least in my
yeah. And
initial thought.
and I would agree with you. I don't think that's, but I think that's where kind of the uncompromising teaching kind of is like a really confusing word because again, if your target audience is basically pastors within the Church of God, and I would assume most of the pastors who go to this have probably a more traditional viewpoint when they come to how they read the word, how they interpret the word, how they lead churches, then I almost am kind of very confused because when I think of I mean, if you look at the definition of uncompromising, it's like the unwillingness to make concession to others, especially in changing one ways or opinions, or being harsh and relentless. Like those are kind of like the definition of uncompromising. So part of me goes, okay, if I'm having people who are very similar to the way I think, the way I believe, the way I preach, then I don't see why I would need to use that word. Like I don't under like that's I think that's probably the part where I'm getting more confused about this. Is like I think the thing that probably throws me off more than the word uncompromising is that their theme is a fresh word on critical themes. And when I think of critical themes, I'm thinking of like kind of like some very like maybe like some topics where they're kind of like very like loosey goosey, I guess, or maybe there's topics where there's a lot of evidence to go either way as part of to a, like a biblical theme or a biblical concept. But then when I look at the topics on these the topics that are being speak, it's like truth in changing beliefs and practices. Like I don't really know what that means. Salvation, like is salvation really a critical theme? Especially when you're talking to a bunch of pastors in the Church of God. In the age of therapy, in an age of therapy, is salvation needed? Like to me, I'm kind of like, wait, are we talking about how therapy's bad? Like,
Our mental health is bad.
or mental health, like fellowship, unity, biblical or pseudo unity, is biblical unity possible? Like, I can see that maybe being a critical theme, especially in this culture today. Like, okay, you know, kingdom of God, where it is, past, present, and future, is that really a critical theme? The Church of God, the body of Christ in this world and in the world to come, is that a critical theme? Sanctification, is that something that a lot of people within Church of God are really arguing about sanctification? And then about the second coming of Christ, is that really a critical? Like that's the thing. Like when I'm thinking of critical themes, besides like maybe two to three out of the seven, I would say, okay, those might be critical themes, but all the other ones, I'm like, I don't know how that's a critical theme. And I think that confuses me most. It's like, if you're trying to get people to come to your event, and again, I know like since Pastor Fellowship is in Kentucky, I know a lot of people in Virginia when I was there would go to Pastor's Fellowship, and that'd be a big thing. And I know your dad, who's out in Pennsylvania, he goes. But
He's on the steering committee,
he's
which
not, so, but I don't know if anybody from like Oklahoma or Idaho or Texas or New Mexico or California are coming out to this, mainly because A, it's too far, and B, like I don't know, like I don't get who to. I mean, if the target audience is pastors of the Church of God Reformation movement, and it's a time for refreshing you, to lift you up, to pray for you, to like kind of give you that spiritual boost, then A, why are we talking about uncompromisable teaching when everyone kind of believes and thinks the same way you do? And B, if we're talking about critical themes, how come we don't really have critical themes?
and I think I also told you the other day that it almost feels like they merged themes together and like they're too wordy.
Yeah, like I almost want to pull books. I have a book of critical themes, and I don't think any of the my books on critical themes that I've studied are even mentioned once in any of those topics. Um, but yeah, like I don't know. And Again, I can't really say too much about Pastors Fellowship because A, I've never been, and I know the people who do go regularly, you know, I think there's a lot of people who I have great relationships and they're great, and they always tell me how it's a great time that like refreshes them and boosts them up, which, that's great. Um, but yeah, I'm very confused with the wording of uncompromised teaching in a fresh word on critical themes when you really don't have themes that are very critical. I mean, am I crazy or am I wrong? Like, I don't know, Micah. I don't really know. Um, but
I
yeah,
don't think you're wrong. I just think that there tends to be um what's the word I'm looking for? There tends to be this relentless pursuit, I guess, of generational problems. And like you said just a minute ago, the folks that go to pastor's fellowship may not go to NAC, and then the folks that go to NAC may not go to pastor's fellowship. And there's a little bit of unwillingness to have the conversations like theologically where the church of God stands on certain issues and um, missionally and globally. And, it's hard not to have this conversation without like just saying, hey, pastor's fellowship really just wants to be what it was 60 years ago. And they don't want to change things.
mm,
And they want to sing hymns and they want church to look a certain way and they want hymns to be sung a certain way, XYZ. Does that make sense?
yeah, it does. It does. Like yeah, I don't know. Like it's almost I almost feel like there is, and I mean, we've talked about this before, that there seems to be almost a divide. And I'm not sure when the divide happened. I mean, but even within the Church of God history, at least from what I've learned taking Church of God history with Dr. Merle Streggy, there's been different moments in time where there's kind of been like these microchasms within the Church of God, right? Like not like huge splits, but things that have happened that kind of offset certain things within the Church of God because a lot of things have just been either they didn't like a certain procedure change or maybe nothing has really or maybe nothing has happened and people just kind of got bent out of shape and they just already started trying to make their own group and make their own kind of like club and whatnot. And I think there's been some splits that happened that were warranted. Like I know Dr. Bishop Clark talked a little bit about kind of, how the National Association got together and you kind of hear the story and kind of his perspective on it. And you go, yeah, I can understand that, why you are kind of still part of the Church of God, but you're kind of your separate group. And I almost feel like, especially when I lived in Virginia, I've had people talk a little bit about certain things that happened in the Church of God, like around, I don't know, the 70s or 80s, that kind of shifted people to kind of lean more on a traditionalist side of things of the Church of God. So they're still part of the Church of God, but they're kind of, they're almost kind of like I don't want to say splinter group because that means they have to splinter off, but they're not splintered off. They're almost like another group with the Church of God that they, may not be officially recognized by the Church of God, but they are, but at least there is some recognition that they exist and that they are part of the Church of God. Versus when we had to deal with the stuff with Cog it was like, well, we may have like ministers within the Church of God who are part of Cog or sign this petition to say, hey, we want to do this, but the Church of God is not saying like, no, this isn't part of us. They may say, yeah, we will claim the National Association, we will claim Pastors Fellowship, we will claim the CWC, but Cog we're not claiming them. Does that make sense, or am I confusing myself with all these little groups that are within the Church of God that may or may not be a part of the Church of God?
I don't think you're wrong. I think that you have a generation that has kind of dug their heels in, and they don't want to do, like I said, anything differently than what they've done before. And then you also have a group of folks who are trying to change things, whether that's for the positive, negative, or indifferent, just trying to do something new. Um, that kind of creates a rift, and there's always been this friction between, you know, pastor fellowship folks and like the national Church of God. And if you're, you and I kind of just sitting back and looking at what history has shown us, it seems that if you were just framing things, that the pastor fellowship group is more on the side of um, like a conservative, very traditional background, whereas if you ask the Church of God folks that go to pastor fellowship what their thoughts were on the national convention, they would probably call them a bunch of liberal heretics. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's kind, and I think when you think about the Church of God, especially if the history of the Church of God, it's the idea of the Bible is our rule of faith, and it's something that kind of gets discussed and talked about, and I've always believed that there's always something healthy when you're able to
A
talk
dialogue.
about topics or talk about themes and kind of you know let's do our homework and we talk about it until we get to a point where someone may find something erroneous in my statement, or I find something erroneous in their statement, and they go, okay, well, let's go back to the drawing board. Or we get to the point where we may get too stubborn and say, well, I'm going to believe this, I don't care what you think, blah blah blah. And I almost feel like we gotten ourselves to a point where it's like each group is claiming that they have the right theology, they have the right way of approaching this biblical topic, this leadership thing. And it's almost like anyone else who says, well, hey, maybe this is a better way, or hey, maybe we should do something like this. It's like, oh, no, 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 we can't do that because, we have our heritage, and we talk about heritage, and we talk about our history and our heritage and everything else. And it's like, well, okay, but you that may not necessarily be 100% true that this is part of our heritage or our history.
Yeah. I don't know.
Which I guess kind of, oh, go ahead.
No, it's fine. You're fine.
No, I was just going to say this kind of leads us into kind of our next topic of what the heck's happening with the Church of God, which I guess is going to be the title of this episode, which has to do with Indiana Ministries. Now, you and I think I led you onto this because a mutual buddy of, actually a good friend of mine, mutual buddy of mine, who I went to Anderson with in school, had this post that happened on February 12th that basically said, who died and made Indiana Ministries the sole arbiters of who can be Church of God or not? Where's the accountability for a rogue state that forces pastors to sign creedal statements that contain erroneous theology themselves and that forces pastors out when they refuse? Who holds a state board accountable when they say, you must agree with us or else? If this is who the Church of God is now, may God hasten her death.
Mm.
Um, so yeah, so let's unpack that. Like, so
What are your initial
I don't
thoughts when you read that?
well, my first, because again, I don't really know anything about this, about what has specifically happened. But one of the things I do know is that Indiana Ministries was kind of one of the first groups or first state ministries that really condemned Cog Affirm and really basically said that Cog Affirm is not we don't believe what the Church of God doesn't believe what Cog Affirm believes. And if anybody who had signed that petition saying, hey, I think that, and again, you could go back to all of our episodes that we talked about it. You could even go back to the interview we'd had with Nick and Karma. Like, the whole thing was, can we have a conversation? Which again goes back, can we have a conversation about this? Let's talk about this. Can we have a conversation to make our churches more friendly to the LGBTQ community? That's really where they wanted to go. Not to try to, you know, make pastors be able to marry LGBTQ people, not to have LGBTQ ministers. Can our churches be safe places for the LGBTQ community? And how can we do that? That's initially what their whole purpose was. So Indiana Ministry says, well, we don't agree with this. And then they started finding people who were living in the state of Indiana, who had credentials at Indiana Ministries, basically saying, okay, your credentials have now been revoked and you're no longer a Church of God minister. And some people did get it, went to the national credentialing chair to kind of get this overturned. And even, at least from what Karma said, because she got hers taken because of it. And then even from there, she said, like, even they were shocked by how egregious and how forceful this revoking of her credentials was in Indiana Ministries. And they even said that they would reinstate her, but then she kind of said, well, no, I don't want to anymore. Like, what's done is done. But now, I guess, reading from this statement and kind of reading other people's posts, apparently Indiana Ministries has been sending a creedal statement to pastors in Indiana saying, hey, you need to sign this statement of belief. And if you don't, then we're going to go ahead and take your credentials. And I know there's some pastors who decided, well, I'm not going to sign this because that's ridiculous. And then there's some people who probably did sign it because, like, well, I'm a pastor in the Church of God. It doesn't matter to me. And then there's other people who are like, wait a minute. There's some bad theology in this. I don't know if I'm going to say I truly agree to this because I don't even think the Church of God necessarily agrees with all this stuff that's in this statement. And they're not going to sign it. So apparently this is becoming an issue with Indiana Ministries. At least that's kind of the snapshot I got from this. But yeah, I'm sitting here and I'm going, at first I thought maybe it was just a Cog Affirm thing, but I think the Cog Affirm thing kind of brought this to the forefront with, now we're going to make all our pastors sign this almost like a statement of belief.
Yeah. Um, which is interesting because, I mean, the number of times we've had this conversation on your podcast about just kind of the structure of the Church of God, where you have your district and your state and your national. You know, when the whole Chaga Firm thing happened, it was like, okay, we're not supporting this. We believe that the biblical definition of marriage is between a man and a woman, which I believe. The idea behind that was kind of just putting a statement out there. This is what this is where the Church of God is in this moment. And basically, I don't know, it just felt like they very much modeled, if I could, steal from, the political sphere for a second. Like when Roe versus Wade was overturned by the Supreme Court, they kicked back those decisions to the individual states to make in reference to what abortion laws could be made and what decisions could be made in reference to abortion. The Church of God kind of did a similar thing where they were like, we're not going to support this. However, we're going to leave it up to every state to decide what is going to happen in reference to, hey, if you support this, there may be consequences. Now, I don't think that I necessarily agree with that, because it's like everything else has to go through General Assembly. Everything else has to go through the General Assembly, every every conference or convention that they have, and it has to be, voted in and made official by the General Assembly of the Church of God, which, again, the National Church of God has a General Assembly, and so do all the states. So it's like,
And I think that would be the thing. Like, did the state, I guess, did the state, if the Indiana Ministries say, hey, we're thinking about doing this, we want to send out a statement of beliefs to every pastor to sign to make sure
yeah, who
that
made the
they're.
decision though? I want to know who made the decision. Like, did they just say, "Oh, this is what we're going to do one day. This is how we're going to handle this
Well,
moving forward"?
because even like with the closing of the camp, like they couldn't technically close the camp unless there was a vote. They couldn't even terminate the year-round program unless the General Assembly approved it. Like
Yeah.
any, I think even like any, at least with Ohio Ministries, like anything that they did or wanted to do had to be approved at General Assembly. And that was it. Like they couldn't really do anything big or major that would shift kind of that would affect churches or pastors or Church of God leaders or the ministries within the state of Ohio. Like it all had to be approved. So the fact that you're forcing people to sign creedal statements, I don't know if any
Which,
pastor in Indiana said, "Oh yeah, let's do that. Let's vote that in. That's a good idea."
which, you and I both hold credentials in Church of God, and we both uh, are ordained through the state of Ohio, right? And it's different in every state. But like when I went through leadership focus and went through ordination before, at the very genesis of what turned into leadership focus, you know, we had to write, I don't know, at the time it was 14 theological statements, and all of them were in different things like ordinances, baptism, communion, foot washing, the second coming of Christ, holiness, things like that. And I think by the time I got finished, they added women in ministry. And I think since then, I spoke with Jeanette a couple of weeks ago, Jeanette Flynn, who's been on the show a couple of times. But I think they're doing away with the theological statements as theological statements, and they are um, implementing something new, like the seven foundation principles of basically condensing the 14 down to seven and basically doubling them up or something like that. I don't remember exactly what she said, but all that to say is that we, during the process of getting ordained in the Church of God, you have to write what you believe down and defend it in a sense to the credentials committee. It's similar to when you do your doctoral programs or your PhD programs. When you write your dissertation, you have to present it to a committee and defend it. And it's just good practice. And so, like, when I hear stuff like this, where it's like, oh, Indiana Ministries is just going to make folks sign a piece of paper. And if they don't sign this piece of paper, they're going to lose their credentials. Like, that sounds a little authoritarian.
Well, and I think, a lot of these posts from, a lot of people have commented on this post from my buddy, a lot of them, some of the similar themes have kind of been this idea of a I'm at this I feel this internal tension of either just saying, screw this movement. I'm walking away from it. It's a dumpster fire and I just need to get away from it. And B, it's like, well, I need to help it. Like I want to stay and try to, help it and try to figure it out. And I think the problem we've had, or at least the problem I've seen within the Church of God has been this. Either A, we are inactive, meaning there's a situation and we kind of like maybe we may slightly recognize it, but we kind of tend to ignore it and hope it goes away. That eventually it like we think it's a fad, so here's this thing and we're just gonna hope it'll fizzle out and go away. Or we act without thinking or having conversations. It's a
Make
knee-jerk
rash
reaction.
decisions.
And I think that's and I mean I've been saying it for years, like, if people if Indiana Ministries really was like, hey, this is what we believe, and for those of you who signed this cog affirm thing, we feel like that is in we feel like that kind of goes against, the things you said that you believe in your, your statement of beliefs of to be ordained, then I would say, well, let's have a conversation. Let's kind of figure it out. Because again, if it's really, if I'm a pastor and it really is, hey, I really want to make sure that we as a church in, that my churches in Indiana can become safe places for the LGBT community. Not talking about ordaining them, not talking about marrying them, but making sure that there's a safe place where maybe we have supplies or resources to help people in the LGBTQ community.
Or
And
at
if
least make
that's
them feel welcome within your church.
or make them feel welcome within my church. And really, I don't think, to be honest, I really don't think there'd be anybody in the Church of God that would be like, no, we're not going to do that. Maybe there are some, but I would think if that was the extent, I don't think that is a revoke your credentials offense. Saying I want to
Yeah.
help people who are different than me. I want to help the minority or the least of these in my community, which happen to be the LGBTQ community. I don't really see that being an issue. Um, but even if it is an issue or you are an issue, then I would say, okay, well, here's what we can do. Instead of me revoking, why don't we go ahead and move your credentials to a different denomination that may have a similar belief system than you do right now? And if there's someone who goes, okay, I want to go, um, UCC, United Church of Christ, because they ordain ministers of the LGBT community and have programs, then and you want to go that route, then it's like, okay, why don't you go try to seek ordination there, and we will move your credentials and stuff over with them and do it that way instead of revoking them. Like I feel like there could be some mercy and grace in this aspect. But the fact that A, you're pulling people's credentials, and B, you're now making other pastors who probably have nothing to do with anything with the Cog Affirm website, and now you're saying you got to sign this creedal statement, which are like, wait, I didn't vote on this, I didn't have a say on this, so I'm not going to sign this. And it's like, oh, now your credentials are gone too, even though they probably have like a good Church of God foundation theologically, and that their credentials are being taken because they won't sign a piece of paper.
Yeah. It's quite frustrating.
Oh, it is. And and frankly, and that's the thing. Like, and the other problem that it is that we don't, since we're such a small denomination anyway, everybody who's on the national level is probably a volunteer.
Right.
So the fact that, so even if you do have a state that's going rogue, A, who's
What are they going to do
overseeing
about it?
that? Let's say who's going to oversee that and put them in check. And B, if it is the general director who has that authority, your general director's retired. And you still
And there's no
haven't found
contingency plan.
anybody.
Yeah.
And even if you look at even when you looked at the interim responsibility of what their responsibilities are. Like nothing of it has anything to do oversight with the state ministries to see if they're operating in accordance to the Church of God theology and belief statement. It's just more like trying to figure out ways on how we could be more effective. Well, but again, I don't have the power because GA has to vote on it. So I can't even like step in and correct a rogue ministry because I have to wait for the general body, which I guess if that's going to make attendance go for the Denver General Assembly go up, maybe this will be it. I mean, I don't know. It's wild. Goodness. And actually, just looking at the posters, one lady who's a missionary over in Brazil, and she's saying, man, the Church of God is active and growing and strong everywhere else in the world except the United States of America. Which, to be honest, I think it's like that all the time. Because there's even other ministries where things are just chaotic and crumbling within the United States, and yet the missionaries they send overseas, those churches being planted, those people that are hearing the gospel, man, church is growing overseas, but yet here in America, we can't even get our stuff together. And, you know, so I kind of believe that's true as well. Goodness. All right. Any final thoughts from you, Mike, before we wrap up this episode?
No, I really struggle with it. And I'm like, why can't we just have a better structure? I
Yeah.
mean, really, that's kind of what what it boils down to. Like, why can't we just have structure?
And
And
yeah. Oh my goodness. Yeah, it's hard. I mean, that's the same thing like when my wife asked me like when my wife asked me like, "Hey, like why are you still obsessed with all this?" Because again, I'm working at a organization that's not affiliated with the Church of God, so I don't necessarily have to be worried about it, but at the same time, it's like, well, I'm still ordained with the Church of God. I still care about the beliefs and the values of the Church of God. I still like their theology, I still like their practices and everything. But at the same time, just the way the organization is and just looking at the leadership, and especially someone who's getting their doctorate in transformative leadership and doing research and stuff, I'm looking at this and I'm going, oh my gosh, this is like, I don't, this is not good. It's not good at all. And again, it's not like I don't have power to change anything. And even if I did have the power to change anything, I couldn't because it'd have to be voted by the General Assembly. And if people disagree with me, then whether I'm right or wrong, I mean, it doesn't matter. It depends on if everyone else thinks I'm right or wrong. And that's just kind of how the organization is. And I think when you have an organization that you can't make any pivots without oversight from the General Assembly, then I almost feel like you're almost kind of put yourself in a position where you don't have any type of authority to really even help pastors who are getting their credentials taken away. You don't have any support for people who when you have these other like groups that are kind of subgroups within the movement that may be doing their own thing or they're saying that we're the true Church of God or this is the Church of God that loves everybody and and again people see this they can get confused and there's never ever official statement saying yes we are no we're not except for when Cog affirmed that was the only time I saw something with Indiana Ministries saying hey there's a group out there saying that they're us but they're not. And that was the only
yeah,
time. And they didn't even call them out by name. They just said a group, and then that raised more speculations on what the heck they were talking about because they weren't specific. And then that opened up more. I think opened up more worms because they're so vague because they didn't want to, you know, really put it out there. So anyway, like it is. I think whoever the new general directors of the Church of God has a lot of work to do to really get this movement you know, back into some type of working order or at least into some way where it can be effective as far as a leadership in regards to leadership because it's just not running well. It's like the old car that keeps running even though it's rolled over all its 999,000 miles and just still going and you're just waiting for it to die. And when you think it's dead, it keeps coming back. So I don't know. I feel like that's kind of how it is right now. And it's just
sad.
difficult. It's sad and difficult to watch. All right, friends. Well, that kind of left that on a depressing note. But anyway, thank you so much for listening to us and let us know what you think. Like, what do you think about? I mean, if you're someone who's maybe knows more about what's going on with the Indiana Ministries thing, or if you're someone who can maybe bring some clarification on the uncompromising preaching and biblical teachings that Pastor Phillips was talking about. If you could bring some more information and light to that, we would like to know. You could send us an email at, go to our website at thescottstedman.com, send us an email, or you could just leave a comment and we will read your comments on air on our next episode. So friends, thank you so much for listening. I hope you have a good day, and we'll be back on for another episode. Take care. Thank you for listening to the Scott Stedman Podcast. The Scott Stedman Podcast is made possible by support from our listeners. We thank listeners like Patty and Scott, whose support goes to this podcast's continual growth and maintenance. If you want to support this podcast, you can do so in a number of ways. First, feel free to give us a 5-star rating if you enjoyed this episode and share it with your friends. If you'd like to financially support the Scott Stedman Podcast, you can go to the website ko-fi.com/the Scott Stedman Podcast. That website again is ko-fi.com/the Scott Stedman Podcast. Thank you so much for listening.